of these things that you didn't know about the movie, and it takes you back and you get sort of the backstory. Well, we don't realize that this is not the first appearance of the cross. You know, the crucifixion of Christ is not the first time that this has shown up. And so I wanted to sort of give the prequel of that today. There were multiple times and iterations in the Old Testament that the cross was apparent and continually was for the salvation of Israel. And the first one I want to speak about is very simply Moses, as Israel was facing opponents in war. Moses himself being that original sign of the cross. For God had commanded that Israel should not fall so long as Moses held his hands up in prayer to God. And very much like that, in the shape of Christ having his hands extended on the cross, Moses had his hands raised in prayer to God. And anytime his hands dropped down, Israel started to have this shift of the tide in battle. They started to lose. Moses would raise his hands again, tides would shift backward, and Israel would start to come back out on top. And it got so bad as this battle kept raging on that eventually Aaron and other people were holding Moses' arms up. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to just hold your arms in place, and it gets really tiring after a while. And so they were holding his arms up, and then they got tired, and they started to prop up Moses' arms with sticks so that they never dropped. But by that same sign of the cross that was Moses' body, Israel conquered. And we have another instance also in the time of Moses where an infestation of snakes was kind of besieging the nation of Israel. Everybody was being bitten by snakes and dying, and they were falling all over the place, and they were crying out, "Moses, help us." And so Moses prays to God, and God tells him, erect a pole and put a crossbeam at the top. Already we see that all he's told him to do is make a cross. And to take a golden snake and drape it over that crossbeam and raise it up above the entirety of the nation of Israel. And then anyone who is attacked, who's bitten by these snakes, can look upon it and they're cured, they're saved. And we think the same thing about the cross now. We look upon it for our salvation. It is constantly called to stand above us, to stand in sight of wherever we are. That's why we put them in our homes. That's why we have them adorning our churches, is so that they are ever presently able to be seen. And the same thing is that when we feel as though we have been attacked or poisoned, and we are falling, and we are crying out for help, that is where we look for our cure. That is where we look for our salvation. And finally, it's not the symbol of the cross itself, but when Israel was wandering in the desert, they were camped out and they had no good water to drink. They had this terrible water that was making them all sick. And again, they cry out to God for help. And God directs Moses, take this log, cast it into the water, and then all who drink from it will be fine. The water will be made sweet. And it's referred to as the sweet waters of Marah. But we see the same imagery that this cleansing wood makes this water to be pure. And we see the same thing in the wood of the cross, that by its wood, by the precious power of it being in our lives, so all of us are cured. We are made less bitter. We are made to be clean. And we see this as we bless waters of theophany, as we bless anything. We begin always by either putting the cross to it or making the sign of the cross over it, that cross may touch it, that it may be purified. And so we see this imagery beginning in the Old Testament, so that it comes as no surprise that when Christ is crucified on the cross, that becomes the symbol of our ultimate salvation. It's another sort of hint in the Old Testament that everything was just reaching, waiting for this moment that Christ appears, waiting for this time of his ultimate salvation. And we see more in the imagery of the cross that we have before us, that this is truly something meaningful. I know that in Bible study we were talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses coming, and I gave them a story about my home parish priest. He had a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses show up to his front door, and they saw a cross hanging directly behind him and were very offended by it, apparently, and yelled out to him that no, it was a stake that Christ was crucified on, and they left. But we see that the image, the actual shape of the cross itself, speaks more to us about that salvation than anything else. Because he could have just had a normal foot bar, but instead we have a slanted one. And why? It's because, one, it gives us the practical story, the practical purpose of exactly what happened in this crucifixion. We don't know, crucifixion kills by asphyxiation. You literally stop being able to breathe as your body sort of collapses on itself. And so they had a foot bar so that as you are suffering, you could lift yourself up, you could push up with your knees to fill your lungs and take another breath. And in Christ, as he did this, he pushed up to breathe, and the bar tilted one direction. It gives us that practical understanding of what happened, the historical look. But if we also look at why it was slanted one way or another, we know that the thief was on Christ's right side. And the slant of that bar points upward to the thief that ascended to heaven. It directs us to exactly what we should be doing. The thief on the right rises, the thief on the left goes down. We are called to follow that example. The Holy Cross points us to that very purpose. And so, contemplate today exactly not only just how important it was that we had this symbolism sort of bringing us to the understanding of the salvation we find in Christ and in his cross, but contemplate also the meaning of everything that we've learned about what the cross is, not just for the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, but what it is for us today. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to Jesus Christ.